Test 2, 2. All right, welcome to this edition of the live edition of The Third Rail. This is an emergency broadcast, which means I didn't really have a lot of time to put things together, but I saw something today that I wanted to get out before I got busy on something else and forgot about it. And I think it's important, and we'll just spend a few minutes going over some things. As the title says, this is NATO, Russia, and you. Now, the reason that you're involved in this is because you have two countries that are nuclear superpowers that are on the verge of nuclear war. If that happens, everybody's dead. Now, I don't personally believe that will happen because it doesn't line up with what I would interpret to be biblical prophecy. However, there is nothing in the Bible that says anything about the United States of America. Russia is mentioned in the end times and is a player in the end times concerning the attack on Israel, that it will come up in the future. It will happen. There's no escaping it. And so we know that. But what I did today is somebody had provided a link to a speech just recently given a few days ago by Vladimir Putin. Maybe you've heard of him. He's the president of Russia. I have watched a couple of his speeches before. And I have to tell you, I'm impressed watching the guy, and of course in America, you talk like that you're a commie lover. They're not communists anymore, of course. You're a Russian lover. Well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? I don't see any reason. The only reason that we're castigated for doing that or saying that or having that position is because it doesn't fit with the government and the media narrative. And we're going to talk about that here just for a few minutes and see how that goes. But what we want to do first is pull up an article on LouRockwell.com. I've referred to them before, and let's bring that up. Of course, if you're looking at this on a phone, you're going to be hurting. But you can see the link there. I don't know if you have any way of saving that, or just go to LouRockwell.com and search for the title of the article here. This was written and published by Lou Rockwell himself back in February of this year. And it talks about our involvement with Russia and the Ukraine and the reasons leading up to this conflict. And I've said it before. I'll say it again. I'm not the only one that says this. Many people say this. It's just not commonly mentioned in the media, and there's a reason for that, is that what's going on there is primarily our fault. And it's, something is going on in our government and has been for decades. If you ever watched the movie Patton, and at the end, they're in Germany and having a party, and the American soldiers and the Russian soldiers are having a party and all that. And Patton is sitting here and some Russian general sitting over here, of course. Then, of course, the Soviet Union, they were communist. And Patton knew and said, let's fight them now. You see that in the movie. And, of course, his superior says that he's mad. He's insane. But Patton had some foresight. And he died later, and how he died, well, that's another subject for discussion, I guess. Let's go back to this article, though. The one thing that I wanted to read, if I can find it here now, it's one thing reading it online, then when you're sitting here doing the broadcast, try to find it again. It goes back to the beginning, right here. Why then is Washington so deeply involved in the Ukraine? Okay. Why is Ukraine so deeply involved in Washington? And we saw that just recently with the so-called President Zelensky. the puppet that we put into power back in 2014, who was in Washington begging for money in his blue jeans or his denims or whatever, his combat fatigues. The short but essential answer is Washington's decision taken by President Bill Clinton in the 1990s to expand NATO eastward from Germany and eventually to Ukraine itself. Ever since, both Democrats and Republicans have insisted that Ukraine is a, quote, vital U.S. national interest. Really? Is it a national interest to you? It's not a national interest to me. It's a national interest to the companies that make weapons. They make billions and billions of dollars. And let's see here. Those of us who oppose that folly warn it would lead to dangerous conflicts with Moscow. Now, this was written in February. Now, we're now in December of 2022. Conceivably, even war. Imagine Washington's reaction, we pointed out, if Russian military bases began to appear on Canada's or Mexico's borders with America. Now, that's a good point. And, of course, we see, he talks about Bill Clinton, even back then. And I mentioned this before, that when the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union dissolved, I think it was President Bush, the first, said, we're not going to expand NATO eastward. And of course, that's a lie. We have been poking the bear. Russia is the bear. We've been poking the bear for decades because, and the Russians, the video I'm going to show you, they even admit it. They know it. And it's because of, they say, number one, that Russia is too big and too powerful. And the Western countries have wanted it broken up, taken over, whatever. And, you know, they're not dumb. They understand all that. But the main reason that we're in Ukraine, and we are in the Ukraine, is because we have advanced NATO. Now, there is... You can read through this article. We're not going to take a lot of time. This is not going to be a long broadcast. People are busy. And it relates to this article here, which I've got. All right, this was written in December 7th. That's Pearl Harbor Day of 2021. And Pat Buchanan wrote it. I love Pat Buchanan's writings. He's generally right. Not popular, but right. And what's it say here? Either the U.S. and NATO provides us with legal guarantees that Ukraine will never join NATO or become a base for weapons that can threaten Russia, or we will go in and guarantee it ourselves. This is the message Russian President Vladimir Putin is sending, backed by the 100,000 troops Russia has amassed on Ukraine's borders. I don't know why my camera is flashing. I have a interface. I don't know why it's doing that. I apologize for that. It's always something. It's always something. Anyway, I'll get my staff to work on that. I don't have a staff. All right. So this is the main reason. Pat Buchanan knew this. It's because the United States has lied to the Russian government for years and treated them like children and enemies and bad boys for decades. And we've lied to them. And we keep moving NATO eastward. And so, you know, Russia says enough is enough. So these articles, you can look them up on Lou Rockwell, Putin to Biden, Finlandize Ukraine, or we will. I'm not sure what that Finlandize means. Something to do with Finland. But you can look up the article on Lou Rockwell and check it out yourself and see that. So why don't we ever hear anything about what Russia's really doing or what Putin really says? Well, let's go up here. Let me pull this up. And let's go to this. This is a video by Mark Dice. If you don't follow Mark, you ought to. He puts out stuff every day, just about. Basically, that's how he makes his living. And does a great job. He's fairly conservative, and he talks about a lot of things, and he's very delicate on certain subjects, so he doesn't want to get strikes against him on YouTube, because that's his bread and butter, and he has to play the game. If he wants to be raw, he'd have to go on somebody like Rumble or something like that. But here he is talking about Operation Mockingbird, And what that is in a nutshell, and you'll see it here in the video, is the government, the CIA's involvement in the media, controlling everything you hear, the narrative, everything you hear is controlled by the government. And he's talking about it here. Let me get this going and see if we can play it.
How corrupt mainstream media is. And he was encouraging people to research Operation Mockingbird. Glenn Greenwald, the independent journalist who Edward Snowden leaked those NSA documents to back in 2013, proving the Orwellian extent that the government goes to spy on American citizens, violating the Constitution. He mentioned it briefly on Tucker Carlson's show last year in December 2021, which I covered at the time, but here's the clip just in case you missed it.
If you go and Google, and I hope your viewers do, Operation Mockingbird, what you will find is that during the Cold War, these agencies used to plot about how to clandestinely manipulate the news media to disseminate propaganda to the American population. They used to try and do it secretly. They don't even do it secretly anymore. They don't need Operation Mockingbird. They literally put John Brennan, who works for NBC, and James Clapper, who works for CNN, and tons of FBI agents right on the payroll of these news organizations. They now shape the news openly to manipulate and deceive the American population.
Other than that, the only other time that somebody has mentioned it ever on mainstream television.
Let me just stop that right there and just... how many of you are familiar with that? If you know about it and you're totally aware of it, you've known about it for years, make a comment and let us know that. I don't think very many people will be doing that because most people are totally unaware of what the government does to control the media. That's why you don't hear anything of what's really going on in Ukraine or Russia for that matter, because it doesn't fit the government narrative. And the government narrative is... It's complex, I would admit. I obviously don't understand all of it, but it has to do with making money for the military-industrial complex, who's quite powerful. And also, it has a lot to do with trying to preserve the value of our dollar as the world reserve currency. And that has something to do with it. And that's going to be changing here soon because, not in this is a rabbit trail, Russia and China and other countries are working on developing another currency that other countries will use, and they will replace the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. And if that happens, and it will happen at some point, it will affect the value of the dollar and the power that we have, and it affects the position and power of the United States. There are people, of course, they wake up in the morning and their whole goal in life is to make sure the United States is the most powerful, the most upfront, in everybody's business kind of country in the world. And let me ask you a question. Is Russia like that? Are they, yeah, they're involved in other countries. Everybody is. China is, other countries. But are they in the same level as the United States? No, they're not. I haven't heard of it. Of course, maybe that's Operation Mockingbird. Let's listen on here.
Television was a Washington Times editor on C-SPAN, which probably nobody was even watching. That is until earlier this year when comedian and culture jammer Alex Stein was also on Tucker Carlson's show, and he said this.
Because what happens is we have what is called the Mockingbird media. They admit the CIA has liaisons in every single form of our entertainment, from the radio, television, news, and film. So you have a media that will say Hunter Biden's laptop is fake.
And guess where Alex Stein learned about Operation Mockingbird? From me. He told me that. Also, over the last year, Candace Owens tweeted about Operation Mockingbird several times, and I think she is the only kind of mainstream major figure to do so. And guess what she talked about just a few weeks ago on her podcast?
So yeah, it does sound like they are a bunch of mockingbirds, which is appropriate, of course, because that was the CIA program title. It was called Operation Mockingbird. You are not a conspiracy theorist for knowing the truth. And you are correct if you know about the Mockingbird being something that the CIA has never discontinued. So first and foremost, in case you are not aware of what Operation Mockingbird was and still is, it was a large-scale project undertaken by the CIA beginning in the 1950s, in which they recruited American journalists into a propaganda network. The recruited journalists were put on payroll by the CIA, which means me and you, we paid for that, and instructed to write fake stories that promoted the views of the intelligence agencies. So some journalists were assets to the CIA and were on the payroll. Other journalists were unsuspecting assets of the CIA because they thought that they had a leak, that they were being given information, and they ran with the stories because they thought they were being told the truth.
Bravo. Charlie Kirk also talked about it earlier.
Okay, so there you go. That was one. Now, what I want to show you, the main thing, reason I wanted to do this broadcast tonight was, I think I asked you earlier, have you ever watched Putin's speech? You said, well, I don't understand Russian. Well, they're generally translated. And he's a good speaker, level-headed, seems open. That's just my take. And of course, he's talking to his own people. And maybe he's snowing them. I don't know. Of course, they would know better than I or you. But it's interesting. So this is the beginning of a meeting that just took place on December 21st and of this year. He's speaking to a large group of his military leaders. I'm going to play just the beginning of it, and then we're going to cut to two other spots in the speech, and then we'll just wrap things up for today. Just stand by for this. Let's see here.
Уважаемые товарищи, мы встречаемся на ежегодной коллегии Министерства обороны в очень ответственный период. Продолжается специальная военная операция, и сегодня с учетом полученного опыта боевых действий обсудим ключевые направления развития армии и флота. Прежде всего, хочу передать самые искренние слова благодарности нашим солдатам и офицерам, которые сейчас находятся на передовой или в центрах подготовки личного состава. Все они выполняют свой ратный долг достойно, рискуют жизнью, не жалеют сил, а если надо, прикрывают собой однополчан. И, конечно, мы сегодня должны почтить память всех наших боевых товарищей, отдавших жизнь за Родину. Спасибо. Уважаемые участники коллегии, хорошо известно, что сегодня против России активно используется военный потенциал и возможности практически всех основных стран НАТО. Тем не менее, наши солдаты, сержанты и офицеры сражаются за Россию мужественно и стойко.
Now, you hear and see what he says. The first thing he mentions out of his mouth, NATO. NATO. Pay attention.
Уверенно, шаг за шагом решают поставленные задачи. И эти задачи будут, безусловно, выполнены на всех территориях Российской Федерации, в том числе и на новых территориях, будет обеспечена безопасная жизнь всех наших граждан. Вооруженные силы и боевые возможности наших вооруженных сил увеличиваются постоянно и с каждым днем. И этот процесс, безусловно, мы будем этот процесс наращивать. Хочу еще раз поблагодарить всех, кто сегодня на боевом посту исполняет свой долг. Благодарю танкистов, десантников, артиллеристов, мотострелков, саперов, связистов, летчиков, бойцов спецназа и ПВО, моряков, военных топографов, специалистов частей тылового обеспечения, личный состав Росгвардии и других формирований за то, как вы сражаетесь. Сражаетесь, я, знаете, не побоюсь этих сравнений. Это не высокопарные слова. Именно как герои войны 1812 года, Первой мировой или Великой Отечественной войны. Особые слова военным медикам, которые отважно, часто с риском для собственной жизни спасают наших бойцов. И военным, да, и гражданским строителям за создание укреплений жизненно важной инфраструктуры в районах проведения операций. За помощь в восстановлении гражданских объектов на освобожденных территориях. Вместе с тем, боевые действия, безусловно, обозначили и вопросы, над которыми мы, как в таких случаях говорят, должны особо поработать, в том числе те, которые мы не раз обсуждали, имею в виду связь, автоматизированные системы управления войсками и оружием, тактику контрбатарейной борьбы, целеуказания и так далее. Это тот боевой опыт, который мы должны и будем использовать при дальнейшем строительстве и развитии вооруженных сил. Сегодня наша задача реализовать весь необходимый комплекс мер для качественного обновления и совершенствования вооруженных сил. На что хотел бы обратить особое внимание. Вся информация о
NATO.
натовских силах, средствах, которые активно применяются в ходе специальной военной операции противодействия нам хорошо известно. Все это у вас имеется. И все это должно быть тщательно проанализировано, использовано для строительства наших, как я уже говорил, вооруженных сил, для повышения боевых возможностей наших войск, а также отечественных специальных служб. Огромный боевой опыт получили наши части в ходе этой спецоперации.
Okay, I'm not going to continue with his speech. You can look it up yourself and watch it yourself. I do want to cut to another part here. Let me figure it out. I can get to it. Where one of his generals comes up to speak and says some interesting things. But you'll notice NATO. And if you watch the speech, he's inferring to the pressure, the attacks, the hypocrisy of the West. When I say the West, it includes Europe and the United States and its allies, and their positioning and posturing against Russia. And it's been that way, as I said earlier, it's been that way for decades. And it's odd. To me, it seems like these folks want to live lives and be normal just like you and I do. You look at that crowd of officers sitting there. They look, and I don't know if it showed it in one shot, but there are women in there, officers, and they all look about as normal as you or I. They're not raving terrorist lunatics wanting to push the nuclear button. They want to live and have families and so forth, just like we do. And so you have to ask yourself, why are we continually poking the bear? I can't find any obvious reason for it, and except from what we mentioned: money for the military-industrial complex, political power, and try to save the value of our dollar as a world currency. And I'm sure there's much more involved to it than that. So let me go to this part here, and one of the generals speaks. Hold on here.
При этом принимаются исчерпывающие меры по исключению гибели гражданского населения. В результате вооруженные силы Украины понесли значительные потери, существенная часть вооружения и техники, имевшаяся на начало операции, уничтожена. Для восполнения потерь Соединенные Штаты Америки, страны НАТО в разы увеличили военную помощь киевскому режиму. В интересах ВСУ работает более 500 космических аппаратов США и НАТО. Из них свыше 70 военные, остальные двойного назначения. Значительные средства США и их союзники тратят на оказание информационно-психологического воздействия на Россию и наших союзников. Мы в полной мере поняли, что собой представляет якобы свободная западная пресса. Ежедневно по команде из Вашингтона публикуется по одинаковым шаблонам тысячи фейков о событиях на Украине. На это работают сотни телевизионных агентств, десятки тысяч печатных изданий, медиаресурсов, в социальных сетях и мессенджерах. Верхом цинизма выглядит тотальное молчание западных СМИ о военных преступлениях украинских военных. Одновременно происходит героизация киевских преступного режима неонацистов.
Wait a minute. The criminal neo-Nazi regime in Kiev is being glorified. Glorified. Well, we just had their president speak to Congress. And throughout the speech, mention of Nazi influence in the Ukraine, which is not a secret, is mentioned over and over again. Do you think the Russians and the Nazis had a good relationship during the war, World War II? I don't think so. They hate Nazis. They don't like fascism. In fact, they speak about fascism later, how they're opposed to it.
Террористические методы ВСУ преподносятся как законная самооборона или выдаются за действия российских подразделений. Украинские националисты взяли на себя роль заградотряда. Ежедневно получаем данные о расстрелах военнослужащих ВСУ, уклоняющихся от выполнения боевых задач. Для стабилизации обстановки, защиты новых территорий и проведения дальнейших наступательных действий потребовалось увеличение боевого и численного состава группировок наших войск. В этих целях проведена частичная мобилизация. Она стала критерием зрелости российского общества, серьезным испытанием для страны и вооруженных сил.
Okay, let me stop that part there, and let me go up and find this last part I want to show you. You can look up the speech. It's entitled Vladimir Putin Addresses the Russian Defense Ministry Board, December 21, 2022. You can find it on YouTube. I just wanted to go up towards the end where Putin is speaking, just giving some closing remarks. Let's see what he says here. Okay.
Уважаемые товарищи, по традиции я в завершении скажу несколько слов. Это будут общие слова, но тем не менее, на мой взгляд, представляющие для нас интерес всегда, во всяком случае, то, о чем я скажу, я думаю, что это всегда и представляет интерес, ну и для сегодняшней ситуации в частности. Уже не раз говорил и даже писал в своих статьях, у наших стратегических противников стоит цель дезинтеграции и ослабления, разобщения нашей страны. На протяжении веков ничего нового здесь нет. Слишком большая, как им кажется, страна, представляющая угрозу для кого-то, поэтому ее нужно немножко почикать, раздробить. Всегда вспомните, века, вот куда ни посмотрите, всегда ставилась такая цель. Я не буду сейчас приводить этих примеров, достаточно посмотреть соответствующую литературу. И всегда вынашивалась идея и строились планы, надежды на то, что после что так или иначе удастся им это сделать. А мы со своей стороны почти всегда придерживались совершенно другого подхода, других установок. Мы всегда хотели быть частью вот этого так называемого цивилизованного мира. И вот после развала Советского Союза, который мы допустили своими собственными руками, нам почему-то казалось, что вот со дня на день мы станем частью этого так называемого цивилизованного мира. А как выяснилось, нас там не ждали. Несмотря на все наши усилия и попытки, говорю это и имея в виду свою работу, и я тоже предпринимал эти попытки. Наши попытки сблизиться, стать этой частью. Нет. Наоборот, были предприняты другие действия, в том числе с использованием международных террористов на Кавказе для того, чтобы добить и Россию, растащить и вновь созданную Российскую Федерацию. Многим из присутствующих в этом зале ничего доказывать не нужно. Вы и так это знаете, что происходило в середине 90-х, в начале 2000-х годов. И вроде бы придавали анафеме всякую там Аль-Каиду и прочих преступников. А вот их использование на территории России считалось приемлемым, им оказывалась всяческая поддержка, материальная информационная, политическая, какая угодно, в том числе и военная. Только бы они воевали против России. Ну, благодаря народам Кавказа, благодаря чеченскому народу, благодаря героизму наших военнослужащих мы этот сложный период в нашей истории прошли. Мы прошли через эти испытания, укрепились. Дальше, как говорят в таких случаях, дальше больше. Наши геополитические соперники начали использовать все. Я не хочу никого обидеть, но тем не менее скажу. Начали использовать все, что плохо лежит, в своих целях. Начали заниматься промыванием мозгов в странах постсоветского пространства и прежде всего на Украине. Причем делали это достаточно успешно и хорошо были к этому подготовлены, поскольку еще в советские времена целые институты работали на этом направлении. После государственного переворота на Украине в 2014 году, а мы предпринимали на протяжении десятилетий, я хочу это подчеркнуть, на протяжении десятилетий предпринимали попытки выстроить отношения в новых геополитических условиях. Но все делали для того, чтобы вот в новых условиях выстроить не просто добрососедские, а братские отношения. И кредиты давали, и чуть ли не бесплатные энергоресурсы поставляли годами. Нет, ничего не работало. Просто ничего. Напомню, что в период дезинтеграции Советского Союза Украина, когда выходила из состава Союза, в своей декларации о независимости, я думаю, что тогдашние руководители России тоже это имели в виду. Уверен, что это было именно так. Записалось, что Украина нейтральное государство. Поэтому в целом можно понять тогдашнее руководство, и в условиях того времени не видели, наверное, угроз. Нейтральное государство, братский народ, единая культура, общие духовные и нравственные.
Okay, that's enough. You've seen it. Mr. Putin is speaking without notes, it appears, or may have some notes, but no teleprompter, just talking. Sort of reminds me of Trump. You know, Joe Biden couldn't do that. He could never sit down and just talk to people and explain a situation like that about his country. No, it would never happen. So I encourage you to watch the entire speech and any of the other recent speeches that Putin has made that you can find. He seems, unless he's lying to his commanders there, and he could be, I don't know. Leaders do lie to their people. There's no doubt about that. But what he is saying, there are people on our side that see it the way he sees it, that we're poking the bear, we're causing the problems, and they're not going to stand for it. And I don't blame them. I'm sorry, I don't blame them. We have no business in Ukraine. We have no business in pushing. In fact, NATO needs to be disbanded. There's no reason for it to exist since the fall of the Soviet Union. Again, there's other reasons for that. It's all about control and money. And they don't care about you or I pretty much at all. Just look at what Congress does. $1.7 trillion omnibus bill that we have no money for, $31 trillion in debt, and yet we're going to spend more money that we don't have, increase inflation, increase the debt, and they're happy about it. I can't figure it out. Folks, that's it for tonight. I appreciate you watching this emergency broadcast from the Third Rail, and I hope that you have a great new year. If I don't see you before then, take care, thanks, and God bless.